So we've talked about our pocket pets, our dogs, our cats, all that good stuff. I want to spend this video talking about birds, and then the last and final video will be on diseases of the aquarium, so fish, also reptiles and amphibians. So as far as internal parasites go, really these are not much of an issue with birds, but some of the ones that you might see are roundworms. You can diagnose it by just observing the feces, looking for long, thin, white worms. Typically they're contracted from just ingesting worm eggs in contaminated feces, soil, or food. Symptoms of roundworms include things like blockage of the intestines, poor plumage, weight loss, and diarrhea. Several treatments are available. It's a simple deworming process. Tapeworms, again, you want to diagnose them by looking at the feces. You'll see these small little rice-like segments. Tapeworms are similar to those that you would find in dogs and cats. Birds will get tapeworms from eating an intermediate host, like a housefly that might have a tapeworm, fleas, ticks, earthworms, stuff like that. Proper cleaning and sanitation really is just the best way to prevent this. Treatment is with a couple different things. You can use piperazine, nicotine sulfate, or Kamal powder. As far as external parasites go, mites really are the main problem. So red mites will appear as tiny little red specks, and they'll actually feed on blood of infested birds at night. And this will cause restlessness, scratching, and picking at their feathers. Red mites are spread typically through contact with infected birds. You can actually dust your adult birds with a pyrithium powder, and that will help prevent it and treat it. And then you want to, of course, clean and disinfect all cages and nest boxes. Feather mites will cause a bird to chew or pick at its feathers. If the bird's feathers look chewed or if they're missing feathers, you want to look for small gray-colored moving specks, and those will be your feather mites. They typically feed on the bird during both day and night, so they're not really picky on a time frame. Symptoms of feather mites include restlessness, severe scratching, feather picking or plucking, and also skin irritation. You want to treat all the cages and equipment that you use for your birds with nicotine sulfate, malathion, or Comafos, and you want to make sure that your birds are sprayed with a mite spray. Scaly leg mites, these are mites that tunnel under the scales on the legs of several different birds like budgies, lovebirds, and canaries. Your scaly leg mites will live their entire life cycle on the bird. Symptoms of them include white scaly deposits, and then they'll become really thick and large and crusty. Treatment for leg mites are Vaseline or mineral oil. And basically what happens is it'll end up killing the mites, but it actually plugs the air holes that are used by the air mites, and it'll actually cause them to suffocate. Other treatment is just by cleaning cages, perches, and equipment, just keeping everything clean. Bacterial diseases. So parrot fever is the first one we're going to talk about. It is a bacterial disease, and it affects the liver and spleen. It's contracted mainly through feces and also contaminated food and water. Symptoms of parrot fever include nasal discharges, listlessness, just not acting right, appetite loss, weight loss, and greenish-colored diarrhea, as well as labored breathing. Psittacosis can be transmitted to humans, so it is a zoonosis. You want to treat your birds with chlorotetracycline impregnated seed for at least 3 weeks, or 21 days. Bumblefoot. It's fun to say, but it's not a fun thing to have to deal with. It is a very painful ailment, and it is associated with staphylococcal infections, or staph infections as they're more commonly known. The symptoms of this, the bird's feet and joints will become very hot and swollen, and they'll have this thick grayish-white fluid oozing out of them, and they're either going to not walk or they may not clasp onto their perch properly. Really main thing to do to prevent this would just make sure that you have a suitable perch for your bird, and also cleanliness, sanitation. Treatment is with antibiotics. So as far as viruses go, Psittacine beak feather disease or French molt, it is a virus that attacks the immune system. Symptoms will become evident really at the first molt and when their new feathers don't emerge, or they could be deformed or they could even break off. The bird's beak and nails might be soft and overgrown, and they will also lose their pigment. There's really no cure for this. Treatment is with adequate vitamins, minerals, and you also want to make sure that you're controlling secondary diseases just through keeping everything clean. Newcastle disease is another viral disease, has a very high mortality rate, and it spreads very quickly. Imported birds are the main source of the infection. Respiratory difficulty, mainly wheezing, is one of the first symptoms, and then it'll be followed by tremors, droopy wings, and a twisted neck. Birds need to be vaccinated to prevent it. As far as nutritional problems, so these would be non-infectious diseases, goiter, this is a swelling of the thyroid gland in the neck, and that will actually interfere with breathing. The major cause for this is an iodine deficiency. This can happen in people too. It really seems to be a special problem in birds for budgies. Obesity. Pretty much any animal is subject to obesity, but this does tend to be a problem for birds as well. This is where they're getting too much food, they're not active enough, or if you're feeding seeds that are too high in fat. Bird owners really need to avoid feeding too many sunflower seeds. It's really the biggest thing if obesity is a problem for their bird. Sunflower seeds are very high in fat and oil, and that will just add to their obesity issue. Rickets is an imbalance or deficient amount of calcium, phosphorus, or vitamin D, D3 specifically, and it will cause deterioration or softening of the bones. Symptoms of this would be lameness, so if they're limping or they're kind of like ouchy when they stand or walk, a stiff-legged gait, or constant resting in the squatting position, or decreased growth if you have a young animal. You want to make sure that you're putting adequate oyster shell or coarse limestone in their diet, along with a vitamin D3 supplement. That's really the best preventative. As far as symptoms of problems with birds, if they sleep on two legs, it could indicate that the bird is uncomfortable or they're ailing or ouchy in some way. Birds typically only sleep on one leg, so if they're sleeping on both legs, that's an indication of a problem. A bird that fluffs its feathers out a lot is usually chilled, and they're trying to retain body heat. If their feces are runny, you might have a digestive problem. And then if they're not flying around or a lack of activity, might indicate that the bird is sick, if they act kind of lethargic. You also want to check things like their eye discharges. You want to make sure that those, if they have any, they're clear. They shouldn't really have much, to be honest. If the bird has their eyes continually closed, it could indicate that they have a cold. Wheezing, if they're noisy, or if they have irregular breathing, could be a sign of a respiratory issue. Not eating, or if they're not eating very much, might indicate a loss of appetite, which would then be followed by a loss of weight, which could be associated with sickness. And diseases of the aquarium is our last and final video for this lesson. I know it's been a lot. I know I've thrown a lot of information and diseases at you, so if at any point throughout this you have questions, please let me know.